Hey, what's up, everyone? Thank you for joining us tonight on Radio Faith, episode number 37. I have a special guest tonight, Mr. Richie Allen. Richie, thank you so much for being on the show.
George, bro, it's an honor, man. Thanks for having me, man. I'm excited about this.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to this. And, we were talking beforehand about topics to discuss, and I just said, we always have such interesting conversations. I remember one time, I think we went into like 1 a.m., just it was like maybe a few hours conversation, just talking.
I did.
I love that, just having those conversations and meeting people to where you can just pick up on the last conversation that you had. And it's just a blessing to have you on the show. And I'm super excited about this.
Man, me too, bro.
For those who don't know who you are, if you know, you know, but if you don't, you're about to find out. Can you tell our audience a little bit about who you are and what it is that you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, I'm going to do one thing because this is going to bug me. This side of my face is so dark. Hold on.
There you go.
Real time, folks. Real time.
This is live. This is all candid.
All right. That's a little bit better. Now you can at least see part of my eye.
And then you can tell people about your production history and why that bothered you.
Exactly. So the long and short of it. So I've been in ministry all my life. My dad was a pastor, evangelist, had us on the road when he was evangelizing. I grew up in church, in a Pentecostal church, United Pentecostal denomination. And I had my first job in ministry at 16 years old as a worship pastor. Back then it was called music director, but it was the job of the same job as a worship pastor. And so did that for a while in a few different churches. After my dad passed away, I moved to Detroit and I had a few different churches over the period of 12 years with me and my wife, and was the dean of music at a Bible college and a few different things like that. And then we moved down to Houston and helped some of our dear friends, Jeremy and Jennifer Foster, launch the Hope City in January 2015, and saw God do some crazy things there, man. And so so grateful for that time in my life. And as of February this past year, I stepped away from that to do ministry and worship team consulting for churches. And I also have a background in production, which is why I'm very frustrated about my lighting situation right now. Your lighting looks better than mine, and I've got all of these lights. Anyway. So I had a creative consultation company, so we did a lot of video, a lot of graphic design, a lot of web stuff. And so I've had a background in that as well for quite some time. And so I've been able in this season with COVID to actually help churches, with that part as well, trying to help them bolster their production side so they can have online ministry, or an effective online ministry, a more effective online ministry as well. So there's all of that. So that's kind of my short story, short version.
That's awesome. And speaking of production, you said the lighting. The only reason my lighting looks the way it is because of you and being under your instruction.
I received that. I tell you what to do, but I can't do it myself, apparently. So that's just the way.
Yeah, I got one light over here. I got one light back there. I was thinking about putting something in the back, like you taught me, the little splash on the back, but it was too much. Like, okay, got to make sure Richie's proud of what I've done.
Oh, that's awesome. But now you can make fun of mine.
No, man, it's good. Again, I mean, besides the lighting, Radio Faith is a podcast. The podcast that I started about 2 years ago, and then you and we met when COVID happened, and we built a relationship. And I told you about the podcast, and then I had pretty much just let it go because I didn't have time. And it coming back is in large part because of that conversation you and I had. So I just want to thank you for that.
That's awesome, dude.
Besides the lighting, I mean, streaming on YouTube Live is because of you pouring in. And I love that that you have so much experience and you don't hold it to yourself, but you just give it out. And anyone that's willing to just sit under your teaching and receive, you bless them with that. So thank you for that.
Man, no, thank you, dude. That means the world to me, actually. One of the things that I loved about you in the first place, and this is the love fest that we're having right now, but one of the things that I love about you is your just your intelligence, your heart for God and for ministry and all of that, and just the way that you carried all of that, and just knowing that you have such depth. And so I love that. I love having conversations with people like you that understand that feel feel the weight of ministry and the depth of ministry and all of that. So I'm really glad to see you doing this, man.
Awesome, thank you. So you said that you started as a worship director or music director at the age of 16.
I did.
Wow.
Yeah, man. So it was kind of out of necessity. So we had our church probably running about uh, in UPC standards, it was a decent sized church. We were running about 500 people, and we had a church split, and some people left, and so about half about half the church left at the time, and a lot of the people that were on the stage during that time also left.
Mhm.
And so it was out of necessity. I was still learning how to play. I didn't even know how to play Amazing Grace. And and my dad said, "You're up, buddy." And I was like, "I can't do this." And he's like, "No, yes, you can, and you will." And we don't have a choice. We were in the middle of a revival. And so back in those days, it was 5 nights, 5 nights a week revival. And so I spent hours learning one song, and we sang that song the whole week. That was all we could sing. And so, but it kind of forced me into a role that I was uncomfortable with. And what's cool about that is that that God has always done that with me. He's always had this, and maybe it's just my stubbornness or whatever, but the way that he always operates with me is to place me in a position of where I'm very uncomfortable.
Mhm.
And that's how he grows me. And I think that's the way he grows most of us, and or wants to grow us that way. Somebody told me one time that God always promotes from comfort to discomfort.
Mhm.
And it's not the other way around. A lot of times people think, okay, well, I have to be comfortable if I'm going to this next level, and I need to feel comfortable. And that's not the way he promotes. He always promotes from comfort to discomfort. So he takes you out of your comfort zone and throws you into the deep end of the pool, and it forces you to rely on him because you don't have the strength, And so I'm super grateful that he's chosen to do that for me, and he's done it over and over and over again.
That's so cool. So you went from age of 16, not knowing how to play.
Yeah.
You get thrown in the deep end. You learn, was it Amazing Grace for the entire revival?
There's a song called "God Is Worthy." Actually, I still couldn't play Amazing Grace. It took me longer to learn that one.
And I'm guessing it was on piano. Is that what you're talking about?
It was on piano, yeah. And so
you're a phenomenal piano player. I remember the first time I ever saw you. I was visiting with some friends at one of Hope City's services maybe 3 or 4 years ago, and it was playing some CMC music, and all of a sudden, I can't remember what hymn it was, but you broke out into a hymn, like just cut through. I was like, "Oh man, it is so awesome!" And then when I met you in March, I was like, "Oh, this is the guy that was playing on the piano at Hope City." So that was so cool. So 16, you have that experience. You're leading worship, and then you said you were a dean of music at a Bible college.
Yeah, it was a Bible college called Jackson College of Ministries. It was one of the more well-known Bible colleges in the United Pentecostal Church, and basically a seminary. And I was the dean there for 1 year before God moved me to another place. But one on a later date, we can talk about the fact that God has really delivered me from about 20 years of panic disorder and anxiety disorder, and I went through a long period of that. And that time in my life where I was the dean of music was actually kind of a recovery period for me, because I had lost my job as a result of my panic disorder. Okay. And so that one was a real recovery for me. So it's just funny how God works, man. He's taught us a lot of stuff through that.
Wow. And did you have any formal training going into dean, or was it something like just self-taught?
No, everything was for the most part self-taught. I didn't go to college for music. I went to college for business management, of all things.
Oh wow.
And so, but my mom and dad always they said, "Look, I know you love music, but you need something to fall back on. And so they said, we encourage you to do this. And so I took their advice on that, and I'm still not 100% certain that was the best advice in the world, but I mean, I am an entrepreneur too, so I have the opportunity to use some of that business management experience.
That's awesome.
But
that's so cool. I want to jump back to something you said earlier about going to that God elevates you from comfort to discomfort, that whenever he moves an individual. And I think the same maybe for the church in general. I mean, the global church has gone through a pandemic, and it's definitely a discomfort zone for everyone. And while you're talking, it made me think about Jesus. He gives his disciples the commission, the Great Commission. He ascends to heaven. He tells them to wait for the Holy Spirit. They wait, and they stay in Jerusalem, and they just stay in Jerusalem, and they stay in Jerusalem, and they stay in Jerusalem until persecution happens, which is discomfort, and then bam, they start spreading the gospel. With that in mind, what is something that you've seen happening in the church? People, the way churches have responded to this discomfort zone that we're in right now.
Man, well, I think it's a mixed bag. Honestly, I think it's a mixed bag. I've seen some churches that have really handled this great, and then I've seen. I think in general, I'll be kind here. In general, I think the church kind of has failed a little bit in this season. I think we've missed a great opportunity. I think the opportunity is still available to us, but I think that a lot of us have just not seen it, and we've missed an opportunity to be a light. And we've rather than that, there's been so much infighting that it's really canceled our voice in the culture. And so we have not had the opportunity to actually bring healing to the culture. I think it's been the opposite. I think we've brought more division in general. And I'm not saying that's for everybody. I'm not being very general. It's a very generalized statement. But the interesting thing to me, I feel like, and I could be wrong. I don't like to be wrong. I'm a 1 on the Enneagram, but I could very well be wrong. But I feel like that God has given the church a very unique opportunity in the last 7 months to rethink church as we've westernized church. And I think he's given us that opportunity to rethink church. I think what he did, I don't think he didn't cause this, but he allowed it. And one of the things that God is really good at, God is great at everything. All right. So let me just put that out first. Okay. But there's 2 things that he specializes in. He specializes in creation, and he specializes in redemption. And he gives us free will. So that's where redemption comes in. And I don't mean just redemption as in salvation redemption, not salvific redemption, but redemption in the way of redeeming something that has been stolen. And so he creates. Then we have this space of free will that we're able to do whatever we choose to do, and we screw it up, which is just, I mean, that's just human nature. We screw it up, and then God comes back in and he redeems what's been messed up. And so I feel like that COVID and the race situation have, between those 2 things, COVID muted the voices of small and medium-sized churches that didn't have a strong online presence. When the shutdown happened, it shut their voices down. And the large churches that had an online presence already were good for the most part. And but what has minimized their voice in the culture, I feel like, is the race conversation. And I feel like because of the large platform that a lot of these churches have, and I'm generalizing, not all churches have handled it wrong at all. But that large platform, they've been very careful in what they say in order to make sure that they're tiptoeing around everybody's opinions, and as a result of that, they're not saying anything. And so I feel like the voices have been muted even on that side. So in general, the American church's voice has been muted in the culture. And And I think God has basically said, I didn't cause this, but I allowed it, and I'm going to redeem that. And the idea of that redemption is to just reset. Let's reset the church now, and we go from the Americanized version of the church that we have now, which is, and there's nothing wrong with high production value, nothing wrong with that. But if we focus solely on that, then we've missed the mark, because what we've been called to do is disciple people. And we've kind of lost that in the production and all of that stuff. We've put so much focus on the weekend experience that's it. That's just about everything. And the discipleship has failed. And so I think for me, I feel like God is like, push the reset button. I firmly believe this. I've said this before on in a few other interviews that I've had, but I firmly believe that the last great revival is going to look very much like the first great revival in the book of Acts. Yeah. And I truly believe that is how the disciples did that, and they were added to the church such as should be saved. It was through breaking of bread, house to house. It was a sit down and fellowship kind of environment. And that is where discipleship happens. It happens on a one-on-one level. It can't happen from the pulpit to the pew. That's not discipleship. That's inspiration. What happens in fellowship is where you begin to see true discipleship. And I believe that the last great revival is going to look very much like that. And God is trying to get us to that point. I don't know that all of us have heard it, but I think some of us are awakening to that God is saying, okay. And we've seen it again with the drop off. I said something the other day about, could it be that it's as leaders of the church, that it might be the great falling away might be our fault in that we didn't truly take to heart the idea of discipleship, so that when we had this shutdown, the people did not truly have a depth of a lot of people did not have a depth of relationship. And we see that when they're coming back, because we've lost 30, 40, 50% of the people. They're not coming back. And some of the things say they're not going to. And so that's because they weren't discipled properly. And so we've seen what that looks like. So my prayer is that we awaken to the fact that that's got to change, and something's got to change in the church, and we go back to that apostolic church model. That's good. Which is very much based on discipleship.
That's good. And I love. Wow, there's a lot right there. One thing we talked about, again, one of those ongoing conversations we had as far as the topic is, I mentioned to you once that I'm kind of, lack of better words, impressed with the way the enemy has used circumstances, whether caused by him or caused by us, whatever it may be. That at the beginning here in the States in March, we had the pandemic, which, like you said, it caused a separation from the bigger churches, separating from the medium-sized to smaller churches, whether or not they were able to go online. Then June, we had the racial tension just flare up like never before. And now, and we talked about it, now we're getting closer to November, and we have another flare up, which is politics.
The election, right? Yeah.
The two big things that have always been causing splits in our country: race and politics. And now we have this trifecta of pandemic. Are you wearing a mask? Are you a racist? And who are you voting for? That's going on. You mentioned, and something I've observed as well, that the bigger churches have kind of tiptoed around certain, hot topics, but acknowledged it. And it's something, I don't know if I had mentioned to you before, that I noticed that when this happened, it seemed that every pastor of a really big church that had a large platform went online and made their statement. They condemned the actions that had happened with George Floyd. And then the following Sunday, there was a sermon that was around racial tension. And I get it. I really do get it. And then, but call me cynical. Right. I was thinking, are you doing this
cynical
because you have to? Are you doing this because you have to?
Right.
And if you don't, people are going to ask, hey, why haven't you said anything? What's your statement on the matter? And I know it's just interesting. It seems that when you get that big as a church, as a pastor, that they have a spotlight on them that none of us would understand. And like you said, sometimes it seems that they have to tiptoe around because I mean we see what the media does with people that aren't behind a pulpit.
Yeah.
And we saw what happened with Pastor Chris Hodges in Alabama shortly after that, with something, just flippantly happened. What do you said about the hype of a church? And that goes in, it reminds me of in Acts, we were talking about Acts, where we have a case where Peter, he's sitting with the Gentiles, right? And then the Jews, the Messianic Jews show up, and he leaves that lunch table and he goes and sits down with his kinfolk.
Yeah.
And Paul calls him out on that.
Yeah.
He's like, hey, you are not acting in line with the gospel. There's no term of racism in there, but we know he's pretty much, it was a racist act.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
They're a different race. And it seems to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, that if you are unequivocally preaching the gospel, then you don't have to make a statement necessarily when things like this happen, because you've always been preaching the gospel, and you can say what Paul says, racism is not in line with the gospel.
Right.
And then you go for, I mean, is that a good way to look at it?
Yeah, I think so. I think we can sometimes oversimplify the plight of senior pastors in that situation, and I can sympathize with the difficulty of how they need to navigate those kinds of conversations. There is a lot to consider, a lot more than, and it's easy to sit in it's easy for us to sit in a chair when we're not in that chair, in that senior pastor chair. It's easy for us to sit in a chair and say, hey, this is what you should do. And as a coach, sometimes that is what I do, but it's easier said than done. And when you're actually sitting there and have the weight of the entire church on you, you agonize over that. And that's why a lot of the pastors are very stressed out right now. They're stressed out because they're dealing with so much pressure from all sides. And but I do think, to your point, I do think that that if we've lived a life that is and preached love and lived a life of loving well and exemplified that, then it should also be exemplified in our churches. And just by way of proxy and by way of, if you've discipled your people, then it should also be evident there. And I think those churches that have done that well have navigated this conversation well, because it's a simple thing. It's not now we have to talk about race because it's a hot topic, or because we're feeling pressured to talk about race now. It's always been there. The whole idea of loving your neighbor, multi-generational, multi-ethnic, multicultural, it's all been there. And so it's easier to address those situations if you've exemplified it. And so, the statement thing is, that's tricky because you do need to speak, right? There's this fine line that we have to walk as Christians in speaking the truth, but speaking the truth in love. And I think sometimes we get one or the other. We go too far one direction or the other, right? Jesus was the perfect balance between truth and grace. But we typically either go too far on the truth side or too far on the grace side. And the balance is in the middle. And so when we have these conversations, or we have to make these statements, we have to make the statement where we say, this is it's not right. Racism is obviously wrong. Racism, any of that stuff, any kind of hatred is wrong on any side. Any kind of hatred is wrong. So we have to stand against the hatred. But how do we do that? Do we do it with hatred? Do we hate the people who hate because they hate. So we love you unless you disagree with me. I love you unless you hate me. And then if you hate me, then we got a problem. That's not right either. We love unconditional. That if we're truly Christ-like, if we're not just Christian, but we're actually Christ-like, if we're truly Christ-like, we have to love unconditionally. And that means you can hate me, you can spit on me, you can call me whatever names you want to, you can do these things to me. I will still love you. That is, I mean, that's actually what Jesus did. Like literally in the flesh, got spit on, got called names, got crucified in the flesh, and said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And so we have to be, we cannot excuse ourselves and say, well, I'm not Jesus. We can't excuse ourselves. We have to love unconditionally. And what I would say to, and I said this in a podcast just recently, what I say to my white brothers and sisters is that we have to have grace when people are angry right now. When the situation with Breonna Taylor that happened just recently, that whole situation, and the way that was very hurtful and disappointing to a lot of our African American brothers and sisters, that there was no justice found in that situation, and they were angry, and I had some friends that were very angry and very frustrated. And you know what? I can't preach at them. Number one, because I've never walked that road, but I can't preach at them. But what I can do is love them while they're angry and love them through that, And so I think we can go back to what you were saying. We can do a statement and you need to say something as a church. You need to stand for what's right and stand for what's true. Absolutely. But I think more than that, it should be a natural response, an outcropping of who you already are, and not something that's come out of the blue. Oh, now we got to come up with something because this is a hot topic, and if we don't, we're in trouble. I think then we've messed up on the early side of that. Does that make sense?
No, that's good. That's good. When you talked about just the love, like Scripture says, loving your enemy. That's what Jesus did. That's what God the Father did with us. He loved his enemy, and then he made us his friend. He made us his own. There's a quote, I can't remember who said it. I think it says the only way to defeat an enemy is to defeat the enmity. I think that's how you say the word.
Enmity.
There you go.
Enmity. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, that's really good.
The enemy. If you attack the enemy, I mean, Ephesians says that itself. We do not fight against flesh and blood, but if you attack the enemy, that's not the way you defeat the enemy. And I mean, we see that with on a national scale, one nation attacks another nation, you defeat a generation of that nation, another nation arises and wants to come back and defeat you. So it gets smaller, I guess, aside from the national scale, between races, generations of hate. And that's a quote that has been with me for a while, and just applying it, and may sound silly, but when you're a parent, and when one of my children are mad at me, and they're just obviously mad at me, they may not be using the words or hate, but I know at that moment they dislike me.
Yeah, right.
They're stomping their feet. They don't want to look at me, and I was like, I'm gonna try something. And I go up there and I hug them, and of course they want to wrinkle out, and I hug them tighter, and I say I love you, and then they just start crying, and they say I'm sorry, yada yada yada. And it's just remembering that, even in that case, I'm not fighting against flesh and blood here with my children, though they don't hate me.
Yeah.
Just pouring that love into the situation. Like, look, no matter how much you dislike me at this moment, I love you, and I'm going to continue loving you. That's so good. That's so good.
It's not easy. It's not easy to do that. It's not easy, because our human nature wants to rise up when somebody rises up against us, right? Absolutely wants to do that. And I think that's what was Jesus was a perfect example. I mean, he wanted to rise up when people were hitting him. That. But he uttered not a word. He didn't say a word. So it's easier said than done. It's something that has to be done.
Yeah. And I know in situations like this, people trolling on Facebook, a lot of good Bible A lot of good Bible believing Christians will mention the righteous anger of Jesus when he flipped the table in the temple, right?
Yeah.
And you hear that often, which is one of the it's a one example. It's like, well, if you're going to be as righteously angry as Jesus, are you as righteously loving as him? Because there's a lot more examples of him being loving.
Well, absolutely. And truthfully, the only people that he was ever angry at.
Yeah.
Think about this. He was never angry at a lost person.
Mm-hmm.
He was never angry at a Gentile. He was angry at the self-righteous Pharisees. It was the Pharisees and it was the people in the temple courts that made a marketing mess out of ministry.
Mm-hmm.
And so it became and truthfully, that's the only time that he actually showed violence, right? He scolded the Pharisees all day long, but the ones that he showed violence to and that he was actually violent to were the people who were making ministry a marketing ploy. And that's where we get that. That's a whole side conversation, right? But we get so wrapped up in making ministry and church palatable for the people, and again, going back to the high production stuff and making it pretty and making it cool and marketing it. I wonder how truthfully, how much God really likes that. And I know there's some of that stuff that's necessary, but at what point does it become about the marketing more than it becomes about the actual ministry?
Yeah,
that's where it's dangerous.
That's good. I want to segue. That's a good segue to go into a quote. Not planned at all, people.
No, not at all.
Go to a quote. We talked about how you being in production, and I served in leading the production team at Anchor Bend. I learned a lot from you. Thank you for that. Prior to that, I had this. I come from a small church, so I had this mindset of high production churches are not gospel-centered churches,
right?
That's the skewed mindset,
right?
That changed prior to serving there. But one thing in serving there, seeing the heart of the people that were serving, that it was setting up the temple, the lights and the fog and everything that comes with a high production church. It was just as much as the vocalists or the musicians on stage pouring their heart out through their instrument and their voice. The person pushing the buttons to make the lights go, they were painting with light and creating this experience.
Right.
And I can't remember who I was having the conversation with, and it just dawned on me that high production value a couple of 100 years ago was called stained glass. And traditional churches now that would put their nose up at high production churches, they love stained glass.
Yeah.
And it just moves with the time and the culture.
Does.
And it's interesting, like you said earlier, that we get into all this infighting. I got into there's a conversation going on about stands or no stands for worship teams, which was, I was like, wow, I didn't know this was such a big deal.
Yeah, apparently.
The church I came from was drums or no drums, and I didn't know stands was that big of a deal. So it's just so interesting what we can get so lost in fighting about in high production. So you said that it's not there's no sin in high production.
Not at all. In fact, so it is always about the motive and the heart, right? It's always about the motive and the heart. If it becomes about the production, that's when it's wrong. Production has production, lighting, haze, atmosphere, all of that stuff. If it's done right, it can enhance a worship service.
Yeah.
When it becomes about that is when it becomes a distraction. When it becomes a distraction in and of itself. So one of the things that Pastor Jeremy and I used to joke about is he said this one time to me, and it was funny, but I don't even think he realized how deep it was until we started discussing it. He said anything that distracts is a distraction. And I thought, well, that's obvious, but at the same time, it actually makes. Yeah.
Sorry, I think you were talking about distractions and I just
Yeah.
lost your signal at that moment, right when you were talking about distractions. Can you say that again?
Yeah, absolutely. No, Pastor Jeremy and I used to joke about this. He said one time, he said, anything that distracts is a distraction. And I was like, oh, well, that's a Captain Obvious. It's a very obvious thing to say. But the truth of the matter is, it's actually pretty deep, is that if we do something, wrong, if something is off center too much in a production environment, then it can actually distract people and distract people from the message. On the other side of that, if the production level gets so high that people are in awe of the production, then it distracts from what God is trying to do. And that's just as bad as it being distracting because it wasn't done well. So we need excellence in production, but we also need moderation in production, and understand what is the why behind that, right? If it's all about getting the largest LED panel screen that you can get, the wraparounds and all the stuff, you walk into that environment and it's a concert. It's not a moment of ministry. You're in awe of everything but God. And so we have to be careful about that balance on either side, right? So production is necessary and can be a wonderful ministry and an asset to what God is doing, or it can be a distraction.
Yeah,
and
that's good.
we have to be careful.
That's so good. You said the mindset, and often I think this conversation happens mostly between worship leaders and production people. As far as, you'll have people that go up and say, hey, they can't sing, man, but they have a heart that glorifies God. It's like, well, yeah, but their singing is really distracting, and I can't. They maybe they should serve elsewhere, because God has not gifted them with the talent of singing.
Right.
And then you'll have it's that balance, like you said. I remember the conversation I was having with someone, and it's so funny. We were talking about production, and I was saying the same thing you said. If you have high production, that's awesome, as long as your heart is in the right place. If you have low production, you can't afford it, that's awesome, as long as your heart is in the right place. Because you can have a low production church and still your heart would not be where it's supposed to be focused.
Right.
But they were just adamant against high production. And they said, well, give me a Bible verse that approves high production. I'm like, what do you...
They didn't have electricity. How do you do that?
So tongue in cheek, I said, well, I guess in Leviticus, where the priests had to make very precise cuts, and that was a high production deal with all the laws they had to follow. So that tells us that God is all about, precision, which is the funny thing.
Good answer.
The funny thing, though, and I had this, whenever I had that conversation, I bring that up. But the funny thing is, God did not mind destroying the temple. He did not mind sending the Babylonians to destroy the temple. And then the next temple that's built, we read, I think, I can't remember what part of the scripture it's in, where the people cried because it wasn't as beautiful as Solomon's temple.
Dude, don't get me started on this. This literally happened this week. I read, that's Ezra chapter 3.
There you go. Thank you.
Ezra chapter 3, when it says that the older Levites, the family heads, and the older priests lifted their voice in mourning because they were missing what was. And yes, I've got a whole thing about that, but go on, keep going.
I mean, just that applies so much to where we're at now.
Yes,
because
it does.
2019, and Jesus himself and the disciples walk into Jerusalem, and they're like, wow, look at this city, look at these buildings, and he's like, it's going to be destroyed. It's going to be destroyed. So it's amazing that God would give Solomon precise measurements to make the temple beautiful, made out of gold. The Levites had precision measurements and cutting and doing the rituals for sacraments, but he didn't mind destroying the temple. He obviously got rid of the ritual, the sacrifice, and then come Jesus, he's like, it's all going to be away with. Not that it wasn't important, but it's like you said, if you miss the point of what it really goes for, that's what he's after. He's after the heart. I mean, it's we're talking about hype, and I think there's nothing wrong with being excited about God.
No, absolutely. Now look at Peter in the book of Acts chapter 2. He was out preaching to everybody, right? He was jumping around and talking about, these men aren't drunk as you suppose. We're all kind of crazy. So nothing wrong with that.
let's go over to a quote that you posted. Let's see, make sure I do this
Yeah.
right. Here we go. There we go. So you said,
I
"I'm
hope
deeply
I hope I was
concerned."
good about this. I hope this was an actually good quote.
It's good. It's good. It's so good that I had to screenshot it and put it on the show tonight. So you said, "Hey, let's hear it in your voice. Let's hear it in your voice."
Yeah. I'm deeply concerned that the American church has missed the lesson God desired to teach us through the shutdown. If we continue to focus solely on the weekend experience and neglect the greater mission of discipleship, we have missed the point. Hype does not a disciple make.
That's good. Can you touch a little bit on that and what your heart was behind that?
Yes, absolutely. So it's a little bit more of what we're talking about. Is I think we had this opportunity, and we still have this opportunity to shift the way that we do ministry now, and get back to the discipleship model, the model of the disciples in Acts. And I think what we've done right now is we've just been so intent on reopening and trying to get back to what we were doing before, and we've forgotten that what we were doing before is now it's tenuous. Now it's tenuous because now the government can shut down the church for anything. So they've broken the mold. So now they've shut it down because of a virus. They can shut it down because they can label something hate speech. So now now it's not. It used to be like you can't shut the church down. It's never happened before. Now they've done it, and now it's possible. So what does the church do now? The church cannot just go back to normal. Well, they can, but this is going to happen again and again and again. And look at the churches in China. Look at the churches in Iraq. Those churches have the government against them 100%. They're growing leaps and bounds. Are they growing leaps and bounds because of a cool, awesome weekend experience? Absolutely not. Not even a little bit. And that's not how it was done in Acts. In fact, I was looking up scripture just a second ago. It's Acts chapter 2, verses 43 through 47. It says, 42 through 47. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship. Apostles' teaching and fellowship. And to the breaking of bread and to prayer. 4 things: teaching, fellowship, sitting around a table, fellowshipping, breaking bread, eating, and prayer. Everyone was filled with awe at the many wonders and signs performed by the apostles. So as a result of those 4 things, we saw miracle signs and wonders. All the believers were together and had everything in common. So they were in a mindset that was unified. They sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. So they were taking care of the poor, the needy, just like the Bible talks about pure religion and undefiled before God and the Father is this: to keep yourself unspotted from the world and to visit the fatherless and widows in their affliction. And so then he says, every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favor of all the people. And the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. So that's how I feel like we're missing the mark if we're just trying to go back to that weekend experience and hyping it up and having, a light show and all of that. Just to, we're back. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with being happy about being back. I think, the Bible says, forsake not the assembling of yourselves together as the manner of some is, but so much the more as you see the day approaching. I do think that we take that out of context too. I think assembling of yourselves together does not necessarily mean everybody. I think it means sitting at the table. Yeah. Don't stop fellowshipping. Don't stop discipleship. Don't stop loving on people. In fact, do it more as you see the day approaching. I don't think it necessarily applies to the weekend experience, but I think it's okay to have a weekend experience. I think it's great to have a weekend experience, but we can't just let that be it, man, because otherwise we miss the whole boat of discipleship, the whole boat.
That's so you just made me think of, again, like I said earlier, the ingenious plan, lack of better words, of the enemy.
Yeah.
Listing what the church is supposed to be doing, and the two sacraments, the major sacraments that we have, are baptism and the Lord's Supper.
Yeah.
now it's going to be like, did that person that just went in the water before me have COVID? Because I don't know. I'm not going to get in that water after them. And then some
Seriously.
churches have where you take off. Excuse me, you have to take off on the same plate. The more
Yeah.
traditional churches. So
Yeah.
it's just, there's so much that right now is testing the church, and like you said, the pressure on pastors. And those are two subjects that I really haven't heard much conversation about. Like, what does it look like to do the Lord's Supper right now, where people
Mm-hmm.
aren't gathering? I
Right.
remember years ago, I just was talking to a pastor friend of mine, and we were saying, like, what is the qualification for leading a Lord's Supper? Because I don't see anything in the Bible like says you have to be an elder, or you have to be this, you have to be ordained. And it's like, well, you don't have to be, because there's no qualification. It's just traditional as far as the leader of the church leads the sacraments. And I said the same question: what is a qualification for baptizing someone? Because there's no list of it has to be the head pastor, or it has to be the person that brought you to
Mm-mm.
Christ. It just seems that there's believers baptizing believers. And he
Yep.
said, well, you're right, but it's, by tradition, it's the head pastor or
Well,
whoever led you to Christ.
once again, I would just go back to this whole mentality that we've got to shift back to the apostles' doctrine. There were no um, big names
Yeah.
in Acts. Now there were people that had been with Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
There were the disciples, but what they became is they became traveling uh, ministers
Mm-hmm.
to help build churches. Right? They built churches and supported the churches that were being built in Antioch and in Philadelphia, the Philippines, yeah, Philadelphia, whatever it was, and and all these other places. And so, that I saw somebody say this the other day. Every awakening has petered out because they weren't generational and they were connected to a man or a group of men running it.
Wow.
And man, that's so true. It's that a true biblical awakening is not attached to a man, and it's not attached to a group of men, and it's generational. And so what that tells me is that the true revival that God wants to send in the latter days is not attached to faces. It's an anonymous thing. It's
Yeah.
it's anonymous, and I've said this over and over again, but I believe that there's nothing more special to God than worship that is anonymous. And that in the book of Revelations, at the end, when there's the 24 elders and um the creatures that are all bowing down to worship at the throne, there's a mention of us, and it says, and it's the bowl of incense that are the prayers of the saints.
Mm-hmm.
And it never said it's the prayers of George or the prayers of Richie. It said the prayers of the saints. So no names were attached to that. We get to be a part of that. And the greatest example of worship is worship that is completely anonymous and that no one gets the glory except for Jesus. And so that's an important thing. Uh, but anyway, I went off on a tangent there.
Hey,
But
no, that's so good. You made me think of, I think his name is JD Greer, Pastor JD Greer.
mhm.
I think he's president of SBC, South Baptist Convention. But I saw a post from him earlier this week where he said his mission in life is to preach the gospel, die, and be forgotten. Preach the gospel, die, and be forgotten.
And
And
that's
that's it.
hard, bro. That is hard because it goes so far against the way that we operate and the way that we think. Especially even like creatives, like in
Mhm.
general, creatives create and want to be recognized for that. And so it's hard to say what would happen if I never got recognized.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember growing up as a kid, I used to sign my name with these big flourishes and stuff because I was practicing for my autograph, that I was going to see one day and have my name in lights and all of that. And God saw fit to give me anxiety or allow me to have anxiety disorder so that I could not be the superstar and I couldn't
Mm.
have the light on me. And it caused me to have to push other people forward and I take the back seat. That's never been easy though. It's a death that you have die to yourself
Yeah.
to say, you know what, my name doesn't matter. Because it really doesn't, man. I mean, ultimately, it's God and God alone. It's Jesus' name has to be glorified, and if anybody gets in the way of that, then they've become a god to themselves, and we can't allow that. And again, that's why I go back to what I said about the hype and all of that. If it's focused on that, man, it's built on the wrong foundation, and it will, whatever it is, how, no matter how great or how glorious it seems to be, it will eventually die out, and it will not be a generational move of God because it's focused on the wrong thing.
Yeah, that's good. You made me think. I think it's Pastor Mark Driscoll that said once. I think he was preaching on the Ten Commandments, and he talked about Moses. You know, traditionally the first 5 books of the Bible are attributed to Moses being the author, and he says we got Moses, the greatest prophet. We have the guy that authored the first 5 books, the guy that brought the commandments down, the guy that led the Israelites through the desert, did all these great things. He dies, and his funeral procession is like 2 verses, and then you move on.
And then you move on.
And then he's like, so one, you're probably not as great as Moses. And if Moses only gets a few verses for his funeral, his obituary, and then you move on, just consider that. That is not about you.
No, it is not, man. Jeez.
So we only have like 9 minutes left. I should have extended this time. I feel like now I have to rush, but hey, we got a few minutes left.
Yeah.
What are some words that you want to share with the church? Anybody that's listening right now?
Well, that's wide open, man.
In less than 9 minutes.
let me see. I had a couple things that I felt like God was speaking to me kind of in the vein of Ezra chapter 3. Let me see if I can find it here.
I'm going to see if I can add some time. I don't know if I can. I should have known better.
So, well, one of the things that I would say to anybody that cares to listen is that a great work is a significant work, not necessarily a large one. And I would just say to those of us that are fighting to grow a church or grow a ministry or whatever. I mean, a digital ministry or a church or anything like that is in the age where it's all about numbers and it's all about followers and it's all about all of that. The true significance is not found in numbers; it's found in fruit. And what is the fruit that you are producing in your life? And fruit, numbers are not a fruit. And numbers have never been a fruit of the Spirit. Numbers are not an indicator of favor either. You can walk in the favor of God and nobody ever know your name. Once again, kind of going back to that. So numbers have nothing to do with significance in the kingdom of God. The significance is what kind of fruit are you bearing? What kind of a legacy do you leave when people leave from being around you or working with you or being a part of your ministry? When they leave, and they will, when they leave, will they leave remembering the fruit of the Spirit, or will they leave wounded? Will they leave hurt? Will they leave bloodied? And if they do, then your ministry may be may not be as significant long term as God would like it to be. And so if you can just I mean, there's so many things I could say right now. I think you've done a significant work if you can love people well and save people from being hurt. And I think that's a significant work. And if you pastor 20 people and those people have a depth of discipleship and a depth of understanding, that then you've done a good work and you've done a significant work. If you pastored 20,000 people and those people have this much depth spiritually, then you haven't done a significant work. The significance is in the discipleship, and so I will say that till the day that discipleship is the most important work of the ministry. Um, it's not just getting people in the doors; it's discipling them to true relationship and intimacy with Jesus Christ. Um, so that would be that, and then in the next 3 minutes, I will maybe throw some practical tips from the book of Ezra, chapter 3. I wrote this down the other day, so I'm just going to tell you. I would love to read it, but the long and the short of it is that Israel came back from captivity, and they took 7 months before they sacrificed and before they settled. It took them 7 months to settle. And what I would say to anybody that may have experienced hurt in any way or has gone through a season of hurt or slavery or just loss or anything like that is number one, take time. Takes time to rest and to settle into the new normal, into what your new life is going to look like before you worry about anything else. And then at the first day of the 7th month, they begin to sacrifice burnt offerings. So at that point, it's take time for yourself, right? For a little while to heal. And then you can begin to move forward with what God wants you to do. And then they started rebuilding the temple, but they didn't actually rebuild the temple at 7 months. They rebuilt the temple. They actually started the second month of the second year. So 13 months down the road from the time that they got back, they actually started. But they were preparing the way from that 7th month to the 13th month. There's so much. It's too much. I can't go there. But I would just say, reintroduce sacrifice slowly but surely. So this is for anybody that's been hurt. Settle in. Give yourself time to heal. Reintroduce sacrifice slowly but surely. Reintroduce it. And then before you begin rebuilding, focus on investing in other people. They'll help you rebuild. Ezra chapter 3, verse 9. I could read that. I don't have time. Don't rush to rebuild. Don't be so focused on finishing that you forget to celebrate the beginning of the work, because a small work, they celebrated the beginning of the work. And then go back what we just said about the Levites and the older priests. They don't condemn those who mourn what used to be, but at the same time, don't allow their voices to drown out what God wants to do next. And so anyway, look, it's all right here. All right here. I won't even start with you. It's I shouldn't even open that up, because we could be there for 30 minutes on that one right there. But
so next time we talk, I'm going to have 3 hours clocked in. So
we're going to do Ezra. We're going to do an exegesis of Ezra chapter 3.
And that was so good, man. Oh, there's so many threads we could follow there, but we can't because I
totally. And then Ezra chapter 4 is a whole other thing, but we'll go on.
Well, hey, Richie, thank you so much, man, for being on the show, and hopefully we can do this again soon. Yeah, I really appreciate it, man. Blessings on you and your family and the ministry God has given you, man.
Thank you, brother George. It's an honor, man, and I love what God's doing with you and how He's using you and your voice. So keep doing what you're doing, brother.
Thank you. And for all those listening, watching, thank you, and join us for next show next Monday, 9 o'clock.